Three, one.
Okay.
Welcome to the fourth of our journeys down the Old Shoreham Road to Enlightenment, the world's most open-minded podcast. With me today is best-selling author Stephen Clarke, most famous for the Merde fiction series centered around Paul West, a semi-autobiographical character based upon the author's experience moving to Paris. How are we today, Stephen?
I are very well, thank you. How are we?
Yeah, we're pretty good. The Merde series is incredibly funny and I can't recommend it enough. Your first book, A Year in the Merde, had a very unique journey to publication. Can you tell us about that?
Unique. I don't know if it's unique these days. It was unique back then because what happened was I had a literary agent who had already tried to sell one of my novels, which later came out as what did it come out as? Brief History of the Future, which is a kind of a sci-fi thing set in Bournemouth, where I used to live, comedy, and she didn't manage to sell that. And then I told her, well, I've got this other book, which is another comedy, this time set in Paris where I live, and it's about an English fellow arriving in Paris to work, as I had done. Can't speak any French, doesn't understand what's going on in the French company, working relationships, doesn't understand anything about French culture, basically. And do you want to sell that? And she said, oh, I don't know, because we've already had a year in Provence, and so I'm not sure people want another book about France. So I sort of thought, well, I think this is quite funny, this book. I'm going to do it myself. But I decided that back in those days, in 2004, Amazon was just starting out. There was no Facebook, there was no social media. So I thought what I'll do is, because back then self-publishing was called vanity publishing, which is probably a term invented by the publishing industry to stop you doing it yourself, And so I decided I'll do it myself, but I'll pretend I'm not self-publishing. So what I did was I set up this company, which I called Red Garage, and I published the novel under the name Paul West, saying this is true. This is the true account of what happened to an English bloke, and I, the publisher, found him out, and and this is his story. And so I started selling it basically door to door in Paris English language bookshops, and there was a buzz, and it turned into sort of a big. Then it got mentioned in one of the French newspapers. This English fellow who'd written this story about working in France and everything, and it took off, and it was a big sort of internet buzz. But internet kind of in those days by people emailing each other saying, "Do you know to where to get this book and stuff?" And it just took off, and I was suddenly having to reprint 1,000 books a week and sell them from my house. My living room was literally a pile of books. And I started selling it. And then once I started selling it, I went back to a different agent in Paris and said, look, I think there's something here. And she said, okay, yeah, well, let us take it from here. And she took over, and she's still my agent now, and called Susanna Lee, and she sold the publishing rights to all over the world, and I've never looked back. But it was a fantastic thing. It was kind of a punk adventure, because I literally was going around the streets of Paris.
It was totally DIY.
It was what?
It seemed like totally DIY sort of thing, but yeah, it's punk.
Yeah. A friend of mine did the cover, and then did the typesetting. A friend of a friend was the printer. It was very DIY, and it was a little kind of punk enterprise, And I was literally going around Paris with these. I had a shopping trolley, which is a French shopping trolley, is like a rucksack on wheels. You see lots of them in French supermarkets, and I could get 70 books in there. So sometimes I'd go off on these tours of bookshops delivering books, and once it started taking off, it was quite magical because I'd go and drop off 20 books at one bookshop in Paris on a Saturday morning, and I, drop off a few books, go home, and when I got home, I found an email saying, "Can you come back? We sold them all." It was quite magical like that, I'd be walking. Once I was walking along the street, and I got a call from France's, one of France's biggest news magazines, like Le Nouvel Observateur, like a huge news magazine, saying, "Can we do an interview? Can we do an interview?" And I was on the phone and they said, "Well, sorry, I've got to deliver these books. I can't do it now." And I sort of hung up on them and got in the metro to deliver my books. Then afterwards, I thought, "What are you doing? You just turned down an interview with this huge news magazine because you're off to deliver books." It was a kind of quite magical, innocent time. But then it was true later on, once I was selling lots of books and it was taking me time to get them printed, and I had to check every book to make sure they were correctly printed because sometimes they'd forget the first 16 pages or something like that, So then I decided that I wanted to be more than a kind of delivery boy. So I was happy when the rights were sold to, a big publisher. It just meant that I wasn't getting quite as much royalty. Well, I was getting like almost no royalty because you only get like 8-10%. But I was happy when someone else was doing the cover, doing the deliveries and everything. But it was a completely magical sort of punk experience.
You're known for your clever wit in all your books, which include non-fiction takes on history, which we're going to cover. What were the comedic influences on your writing?
Comedic influences on my writing. Well, first of all, for the things like the history, the sort of non-comedic element, the comedy in my books is always based on quite a lot of research. So for write anything about France until I'd lived there for about 10 years, until I really knew the place, because I didn't want my book to be a sort of touristy book where someone comes to Paris and says, "Oh, everyone eats garlic and is smelly," or whatever. I didn't want that sort of nonsense. I wanted something based on reality. So A Year in the Merde, in America, A Year in the Merde is still sold as a travel book. People think it's true. It's a novel.
Oh, really?
If you analyze it, it can't be true. Because things happen in sort of such a coincidental order. There's a strike of the month, and in February it's the porn strikers who go on strike, the porn actors who go on strike because it's the month, February, month of love, blah, blah, blah. But it's based on research. And the same with the history. Doing my history books, it kind of takes me back to university, going into archives, looking up history. And then what I like to do is then take my angle on things. So I'll observe something like, let's say, a simple example from daily life. Parisian drivers don't always stop at red lights. If you want to cross the road, don't just wait till the little green man is flashing at you, or not flashing, but is there. Wait till the cars all stop, because quite often Parisian drivers don't stop at red lights. So, okay, that's a kind of basic fact of life. But my take, or my character's take on it was, okay, well, I understand them, because Parisians think, I'm quite intelligent. I've got the baccalaureate, that thing there is just a light bulb. How can a light bulb tell me, who studied philosophy up until baccalaureate level, how to live my life? Am I going to obey it, or am I going to obey my Parisian instincts? So I go through the red light. So so the character takes a personal angle on things. And I always try to base it on research and reality, but then look at it from a different angle, like looking at Joan of Arc in my book, 1,000 Years of Annoying the French. I research medieval documents. I can read medieval French, but then what interested me was the whole angle of, the French are very angry at the Brits for burning Joan of Arc, but in fact, it was a French soldier who captured her, a French judge who condemned her to death, and then they just handed it over to the English soldiers to be burned. So there's a whole angle of, this is your patron saint, but you burnt her. So the comedy is like research plus personal angle, like any kind of comedy, stand-up comedy is the same thing. You know, the stand-up comedians talk about their daily life, but from a personal angle. So I do that. But in terms of influences, I mean, huge influences on me. People like Douglas Adams, you know, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. P.G. Wodehouse, who plays wonderfully with words and creates a kind of, you know, feel-good atmosphere. I love that kind of stuff. And then stand-up comedians as well, for the way they do their timing. You know, once a long time ago, about 20 years ago, I sent a whole bunch of jokes to, excuse me, to Tim Vine. And he very kindly rang me up and he gave me a kind of masterclass in half an hour on the phone of why this joke works and this one doesn't. And it taught me that, in fact, when you're writing comedy or a joke, you start with like this much of an idea and you cut it down and down and down and down until you get to the essence of it, the comedic essence.
Well, he's known as
So,
like
you know,
one-liners, isn't he?
exactly. Yeah, he's known for like one killer word that hits you at the end of the joke. Bang, you know, it's all about timing and every word counts. And for me, that is very important when I'm writing. Because for me, when I'm writing, especially, you know, a really thick book like 1,000 Years of Knowing the French, or my book about the Revolution, French Revolution, the French Revolution, what went wrong, they're huge, weighty subjects, but you've got to make them, yeah, how the French won Waterloo, I think they did, yeah.
Yeah,
Huge,
we'll talk
weighty
about that in a
subjects. You've got to
bit.
make them interesting. Yeah, you've got to make them interesting to readers, and the way to do that is to select the information and then tell it in an entertaining way. And that takes quite a lot of work, but I think it's worth it in the end, because in the end, the read itself should be pretty effortless and fun, entertaining, and informative. And the only way to be sort of really informative is to grab people's attention. And the best way to do that, I find, is through being entertaining. You know.
I made this comment in another review, and to kind of jump on that, I wish you were my history teacher. If you were, what would be the funniest thing about the French you would teach me?
History. Funniest. There's a lot. I mean, 1,000 Years of Knowing the French. Most of my books turn history on its head, right? So almost like the funniest thing for me, it's not funny, it's kind of tragicomic, was it's not really funny at all, but it's sort of the funniest thing for me is that in the Second World War, yeah, in the Second World War, you know, Charles de Gaulle wasn't told about D-Day. You know, we were invading his country, but he wasn't told about D-Day because they didn't trust him. All right, because in 1940, the Allies had planned to invade Dakar, the capital of Senegal, which was where the Vichy French, you know, the collaborationist government, had hidden a lot of its gold. So the Allies planned an attack on Dakar, to take Dakar, which was a French colony, you know, beat the local Vichy troops and seize some of the gold, or all of the gold. And apparently, as soon as he learned this, Charles de Gaulle, who was then in London, went out and bought himself a safari suit and told everyone where he was going. And so when he arrived at Dakar, everything had been reinforced. There was a French air force waiting for the attackers, and it all went horribly wrong. So from then on, obviously, the British Secret Services did not trust de Gaulle, so he didn't know about D-Day, which is kind of tragic. Which is why I always ask French people, well, I don't ask all of them, obviously, when I go to the supermarket to buy some vegetables, but I often ask French people, how many French soldiers do you think took part in D-Day? Out of about 150,000 troops who landed on D-Day, how many of them were French? And they almost always give me something like, you know, 20,000, 30,000, you know, and they always think it was almost all Americans, whereas the majority were Brits and Canadians. And I tell them, no, actually, I've forgotten the exact number now, but it's something like 127 French soldiers. It's something like that. I'd have to look at my book to check the exact. Only about 127 French soldiers landed on D-Day. And the French can't believe that. And it would have been more, except when de Gaulle found out on like the same day or the day before about D-Day, when he was under lockdown, he couldn't tell anyone or go anywhere. He ordered his advisors, who were supposed to accompany the troops, the French, the Brits, Canadians, and Americans, and Poles, and people like that, onto the beaches. He ordered his people not to go with them, to advise them and be intermediaries, because he was so angry. So, you know, so few French people took part in D-Day. It's kind of tragicomic. But the tragicomic thing is that the French people are sure that, you know, the French won D-Day along with some GIs, and that was it. They don't realize the truth of the matter.
I want to read to you a review I did about Merde in Europe. The latest in the Pole West series sees our protagonist helping out with the whole upcoming EU referendum by being employed by the French government in Brussels to help with the vote to remain. What happens is a witty and entertaining farce with double crossings and backstabbings that tries to make light of the whole shit show before the actual vote happened. Yes, this book was released before the vote, but actually perfectly captures both the mood of the UK and the continent, exposes some of the absurdities and lies through fiction, and with hindsight, living post-vote and outcome actually makes me even more sad in some ways. But because that is both poignant and telling of a very specific time in our ongoing history, it's a great read on its own, or part of the series, Merde. Okay, so what's I going to say? What was the reaction to your book in both the UK and in France at the time, which was just before Brexit?
Well, as you can imagine, it was split down the middle, because Britain was already split about the whole Brexit thing. In fact, it's true that it's the only time really in my professional life as a writer that I've actually tried to take part in politics, because it saddened me. And, you know, I've lived on the continent for most of my adult life, and so I've taken advantage of the fact, or I took advantage of the previous way of life of just being able to flit about from London to Paris. You know, it was like a shuttle. I was living in France, working in France. I didn't even have a residence permit. I didn't need it, you know. And I knew lots of people whose livelihoods depended on ease of transport and work between the two countries, you know. I even knew someone whose job was organizing Marks and Spencer's delivery lorries in all around Europe. You know, obviously they're out of a job now. So it seemed very, and what seemed to me very sad was that the Leave campaign was basing itself on all these ancient journalistic pieces of fake news that had been in the British press for years. And, you know, in the past, we just thought it was a joke, you know, when they used to go on about how, you know, and I found a whole bunch of real articles. I went, again, research. I went back and found these articles, real articles saying, Europe wants to ban the British banger, you know, or Europe wants to ban bagpipes. Brussels wants to forbid English barmaids to have cleavages, you know, low-cut dresses. These were all real reports. Some of them, you know, Boris Johnson was one of the first. He was working for the Telegraph, and what was it, the Telegraph, I think. He was working for the Telegraph, and he kind of started all this bashing when he was there. He was the first, and it was nonsense. It was all lies. And then, you know, the worst one was the shape of bananas. You know, Brussels wants to tell us what shape bananas have to do, and it was all lies. But it was clever lies, because I realized what the journalists were doing was they would take a real European law, for example, worker safety. In the workplace, you couldn't, according to European law, you can't have more than a set number of decibels before workers have to be given ear protection, right? Now, the number of decibels, some British, journalists found out that the number of decibels that was corresponded to the noise bagpipes make if you like stick your head up against them. And so they wrote a report, anti-Brussels, anti-EU report, saying Brussels wants to ban bagpipes. It doesn't want to it didn't want to ban bagpipes at all. It was just there was a law protecting workers against excess noise, and each time it was something like that. The ban the British banger, that was rubbish as well. All it was a European law saying that meat, so-called meat that was made up of like bits of sinew that had been scraped industrially off bones couldn't be classed as meat. So therefore, you couldn't say that some of these really bad quality English sausages that were made of scrapings off the back of the abattoir floor, they couldn't be called meat anymore. It had to be real meat, minced meat going into a sausage. Again, that was just a basic like food hygiene, food quality law. But it was so easy for a British newspaper to say, Brussels wants to ban the British banger. They were doing this, so I just decided to write this novel based on a Brit in Brussels finding all this stuff out because he's working for a French member of the European Parliament. So I went there and I work shadowed a fella I knew who was working in Brussels. And I also talked a lot about how some people in Brussels were overpaid, lobbyists were overpaid. There were lots of things that needed to be reformed, and lots of people in Brussels wanted and still want to reform them to save money, ease the bureaucracy. But what I found was fundamentally what the EU was about was giving everyone clean air, clean water, clean beaches, decent quality food, which is described on the packet, good working conditions. They were just, they just had to protect us. And these Brits were saying it's just a waste of money. And, it seems to be now, despite what was written on that the Brexit bus, the NHS is not getting £350 million a week extra now that Brexit is there. And I just have literally come from a Marks and Spencer's in Paris that's going to close down soon because they can't get the produce, and their fridges now, their cold cabinets, half of the cold cabinet is full of tinned food because there's nothing else, there. And whereas French supermarkets are jam-packed full of food. So, I felt, for me, not in a political sense, but in a sense of like just the daily life, that I needed to say something to say, if you want to know what Europe is really about, here it is. If you don't like it, vote against it. But quite honestly, here's some good stuff, because Brussels is not telling you the good stuff. Because I actually went to to see the Department of Public Relations at the EU Parliament. And I said, why aren't you telling people, the Brits, you're getting dumped on in all the British newspapers and in the media. Why are you not telling Brits, okay, do you know we've done this? We've financed this bridge and this school and this industrial estate. Why aren't you telling people that in Britain, And they said, oh, we're not allowed to do that because that would be propaganda. We just don't have a budget to do that. So I thought I'll do something which tells people what really goes on in Brussels, the good and the bad, and then maybe it will work out. Maybe they'll be able to vote better informed. But in the end, of course, not many people actually voted, did they? It's pretty low turnout, sadly.
How has the French COVID response been?
The French what?
COVID response.
It started out very slow, pretty badly, where there were no masks, and the government was saying, because there were no masks, and they couldn't get the masks, they were saying you don't need masks, which was nonsense, of course. And but since then, it has been pretty well organized, because now the cases are falling. When the vaccination is going on pretty quickly. Apparently in Paris now, the number of adults vaccinated is over 80%. And so we have now got back to a state in France where people you have to wear masks in shops and in public, in museums and stuff. You have to show your vaccination certificate or a recent test certificate to get into loads of places, to go to a cafe. And so they're forcing people to obey rules. And it seems to me that, sometimes you need to force people because, when I went back to London and, even I had to go back to, when I went back to London, you had to buy a test for day 2 and day 8 of your stay.
Yeah.
You had to buy it from this laboratory you've never heard of. You sent off the money, you got the test, you did it at home. So how did they know that people weren't just sticking the swab up their dog's backside, And then you sent it off, and I did several of these. Half the time I never got the results back. What's the point of a test? You're paying 100 and something pounds. You're not getting any results back. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. And so in France, tests have always been free for French people if you're on the Social Security, and everyone is. And they charge about £20 for foreigners, a PCR test. And, if you haven't got the result, the test doesn't count. So it's been kind of stricter, more efficient in a sort of French technocratic way, a bit more autocratic. Some people say dictatorial, but in times of a pandemic, I think you need some strict rules. Whereas in the UK, last I heard people saying, "Oh, you have to live with the virus, and you don't have to wear masks." And my kids live in London, and they're worried when they get on public transport. There are so few people with masks. So you're shut in an airless tube with someone for half an hour, and they're not wearing a mask. The chances are much higher of catching the virus. But that seems to be because from the very beginning, those in high places in government have been ignoring the rules themselves. So quite obviously, why is the population going to obey a rule if their leaders aren't obeying it?
No, totally.
Whereas French politicians have all been wearing masks during press conferences, publicly getting vaccinated, and the message over here is, if this vaccine was some great scam, would the politicians honestly be getting it? No, they wouldn't. If masks weren't effective, would the politicians be wearing them? No, they wouldn't. So, this kind of governing by example is now bearing fruit. But it did start a bit disastrously. But then it started disastrously in almost every country in New Zealand, except New Zealand, didn't it? Because people weren't prepared.
Yeah, you wrote a book called 1,000 Years of Annoying the French. I said it was a brilliant and accessible for idiots like me and readable account of our special relationship with France. It's naughty, witty, and just excellent. How annoyed are the French at you with your books?
Funnily enough, not very annoyed at all. I mean, I do get the occasional email from a Napoleon fan or a Joan of Arc fan saying, "Go home." But it's very rare because, flattering myself, what they often say to me is about the novels, for example, about Paul West charging around in France, not understanding anything. Yeah, it's true. Parisians are like that. What they mean is all Parisians except moi are like that. But it's based. What I talk about in the novels is based on truth and observation. I'm not saying, "Oh, they all smell of garlic and no one shaves under their arms." I'm telling the truth about how they work and how they get on in life. And this sad, this whole story about the Australian submarines. If the Australians had read my book, Talk to the Snail, one of my novels, they'd have known that, apparently they were complaining about the French taking 4 weeks holiday in summer, having long lunch breaks, and turning out 15 minutes late for meetings. Now, this is exactly the kind of thing that the character Paul West is saying in my novel, and that I talk about in my book, Talk to the Snail, which is actually quite often given to English-speaking expats, when they arrive in France to work in French companies, they're given this book by
Really? Wow.
companies saying, yeah, saying this is what we're like. You know, you're gonna have to live with us. Because, and I give talks sometimes in French and British companies saying, you know, French and British are not the same. They work in completely different ways. There's good on both sides, and if you mix the two, if you mix the kind of British eccentricity and kind of wanting to break the rules and stuff like that with the French sense of okay, we've got a deadline. I'm gonna get my work in on time because I want to go on a long weekend or holiday. It's the best motivation in the world. I worked in a French company for years and years. We were never late because all the people in my team knew that they wanted to finish at Friday lunchtime so they could go on a long weekend. They wanted to finish before the 30th of June because they wanted to take a month's holiday off. They were motivated and they got it done. And apparently, if you compare the efficiency of French and Anglo-Saxon, as they call them, you know, British American workers, per hour of office presence or work, the French are far more productive because they know what they want out of life, which is a good lifestyle, and they know how many days they're going to work and how many hours they're going to work, and they just get it done. Whereas, you know, some poor American who's theoretically got 2 weeks holiday, but everyone thinks he's a wimp if he takes more than 3 days off a year, you know, working overtime and, you know, killing yourself. The French aren't interested in that. You know, the my old company, we were offered the chance of, or we don't want to pay rise if it means, even if it, you know, if it means working more hours. No, you know, people in France want a good lifestyle, and so this is what I say in my books. You know, I tell the truth about France, and I tell the truth about history as well. I mean, everything I say about Joan of Arc and Napoleon and de Gaulle is, you know, true. I can give the sources. It's all true. It's just that the French history to tell it like that. So I'm telling the truth. So, excuse me. What the French say is, okay, you're right. Yeah, you're right. And yeah, it is quite funny. And actually, the good thing about the French is they're very open-minded. So they don't mind if a Brit is talking about them and publishing books about them. They actually think it's quite flattering. They think, oh yeah, we're so fascinating. People want to publish a book about us. Whereas I'm pretty sure if a French writer arrived in London and wrote a book about, you know, this is Londoners, you know, this is what Londoners are like, Londoners wouldn't read that. They'd say, like, who is this French person thinks they know all about us? Rubbish, you know, whereas the French don't say that. They're very open-minded. So, you know, in a way, I'm very lucky. They accept me.
No, they'll be marched out of town. You live in Paris and wrote a really interesting book about the city, Paris Revealed. It's very much an insider's guide from a local and how to survive the Merde. It's part travel guide and part love letter. When did you fall in love with the city?
Yeah, Paris Revealed kind of gives off the track things to do and see in Paris, and you know how to get the best out of restaurants and stuff like that. When did I fall in love? I think maybe actually there's a moment in A Year in the Merde, which is kind of autobiographical, where I started working in this French office near the Champs-Elysees in a quite posh area, and I went out to lunch one day, and it was fairly chaotic. You know, there were tables almost on the pavement, you know, and I sat down and I was with and the waiter was a bit grumpy and haughty, you know, and I mean, again, this is something I say about Parisian waiters. They're not grumpy, they're just efficient, they're professionals. So if you faff about you know, haven't decided, if they come to your table and say, do you know what you want to order, and you say yes, and then you hesitate, they think time waster, and they go off and come back 5 minutes later. You know, they're being professional. Anyway, we had a sort of bit of a waiter like that, and you know, there were all these really well-dressed people walking by because it was a posh office area. And I sat down and I started tucking into this chèvre chaud, goat's cheese on toast salad with this wonderful vinaigrette. And I was sitting there like on the pavement with people walking practically past my knees. They could have, you know, put put out the hand and like grab my salad, and it was like almost oppressive. But suddenly, sort of sitting on autumn day in Paris, having been, I've got my order, I'm sitting there, I suddenly felt like, I'm at home. Here I am, I'm in Paris and I'm being a Parisian. And I just thought, yes, this is what it's all about. And now I know how to get it. Living in Paris is a bit like a slightly complicated computer game. Once you've mastered the rules, you can have a fantastic time because you know how it works. So you go into places, again, in Paris Revealed, and talk to the stand as well. I say, you go in somewhere, first thing you do is say, bonjour, bonjour, in a nice happy way, smile at someone. Don't say, cappuccino or, why aren't I being served or something like that. No, you will never get served if you say that. Just say bonjour, even if you're impatient or whatever. And you will open the doors to a wonderful lifestyle. And so there is that moment in the novel where Paul West gets his chèvre chaud and suddenly thinks, wow, this is it. And I do remember that sort of physical feeling of thinking, now I'm here, and I'm part of it. And it's not that difficult if you just sort of let it all happen and you learn how to live it.
There's something else I want to talk about. This book here, this book right here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How the French won Waterloo.
Or I think they did. Yeah.
Well, I think they did. The French were the originators of fake news, weren't they?
Sorry?
The French were the originators of fake news, weren't they?
I didn't understand. Sorry, they've got a weird sound thing going on.
The French, in this book, fake news.
Oh, the fake news. Yeah, they sort of do fake news.
It's about the country. This book is about the country's attitude to their history. One thing that got me about this was how they were the originators of fake news. If you talk about that.
About Napoleon, the reason I wrote that book was because I knew that there are still some really strong fans of Napoleon in France. He's loved and hated by people. Some people think he's a tyrant, and some French people think he's an absolute hero. And the ones who think he's a hero, they are so enthusiastic that they rewrite history. In fact, Napoleon himself rewrote history, or his history anyway, when he was on St. Helena, locked away. He basically sat down and dictated his version of his career, which was, it was pure propaganda. And they kind of swallowed it wholesale. So I was reading about him, and I was reading these books which said things like he didn't lose at Waterloo, for example. He won the morning, he just lost the afternoon. Or he beat the Brits, he beat Wellington, but then he lost to Blucher. Or the French won the moral victory because it was the French army against all the armies of Europe, because the Brits, so these historians say, the Brits were cheating because they paid all the other armies of Europe to fight against Napoleon. So it was an unfair battle, which was true. The Brits were paying all the others and supplying arms to everyone, because it was the fight against Napoleon was a fight for sort of world domination, for colonies and everything. But these French historians went way over the top and were saying things like, Waterloo wasn't a defeat, it was just a sort of victory that went unnoticed, or stuff like that. And I thought this was rather comic, tragic. Again, another tragicomic thing that I wanted to overturn. So I wrote a book about Napoleon, the truth and the fake news, and I actually came to have a grudging respect for one side of his character. On one side of his character, he was the completely unfeeling, dictator general who would send thousands of men to their deaths. They were cannon fodder, in order that his highly trained guard could then move in and win the battle. Um, Battles, Waterloo was not a heroic battle for anyone. It was blood and guts. And apparently, the year after the battle, the harvests on the battlefields were excellent, because there was so much blood and fertilizer, the blood and guts and stuff from all the cannon. People had been ripped to shreds by cannon. So on one side he was that, but on the other side he was a man with a real vision on how to organize a country. He built canals. I live quite near a canal that he built in order to bring fresh water into Paris, because a lot of Parisians at the time were drinking river water, and the River Seine was the sewer, and they were dying of cholera. So he brought this fresh water in from the River Ourcq, which is that he was developing harbors, all sorts of engineering projects. He was trying to make France an organized. He sort of founded or refounded lots of engineering schools and things like that, and he wanted to give education to lower class people, whereas before the revolution, they'd been only for upper class people. He was pretty sexist, very sexist, in fact. Women could not get divorced, women couldn't earn any money and things like that. But he wrote the laws that are still the laws of France today, except for it's a more they're fairer now. But he was a great organizer, and kind of he was trying to do the common good. The only thing, he did some very bad things as well. He reestablished slavery, which had been abolished by the revolution, because he thought that the French colonies, the sugar islands out in the Caribbean, were really important for the economy. So he reestablished slavery there. A lot of people haven't forgiven him for that. So he made some really huge mistakes, but in a way, he was a very modern ruler, and I think it's very telling that of all the leaders, all the world leaders, throughout history, he's still perhaps one of the most recognizable. He created a uniform for himself, and still now, if you go to the museum at Waterloo, there are more statues and pictures and the mugs of him on sale than of Wellington or Blucher or anyone else. He's instantly recognizable, even 200 years later. He really did sort of put his stamp on the world, and he still has fans.
Tell us what the British did with propaganda and Napoleon. I read that Joseph Goebbels was inspired by this and co-opted it for the Nazis.
Well, sadly, it's not something you should say too loudly in France, but in some ways, Hitler and the Nazis did imitate Napoleon, because Napoleon had this big thing of creating new uniforms for everybody, right? He created new uniforms for all walks of life, just as Hitler did. Hitler also, created a uniform for himself, as Napoleon had done, to give himself an instantly recognizable image. So Napoleon did a lot of things that were kind of he put the stamp on what a dictator had to be, a modern dictator had to be. So all of these people like Mussolini and Franco, they created an image for themselves, a brand image, just as he had done. And in order to combat this, the Brits had to go in for some pretty tough anti-Napoleon propaganda. There were massive campaigns of posters against him, caricatures trying to put him down. And when he eventually died, of course, the Brits they measured his corpse, and they underestimated his size. They kept calling him they kept going on about how small he was. In fact, he was of average, he was of average height for the time, and no French source says how small he was. but the Brits were saying he was really small. And then when he died, they confirmed this by faking his measurements, and they even claimed that the fellow who did the autopsy cut off his willy and sold it. Anything to destroy his image. The Brits were doing all this the whole time, even after his death, because they knew how powerful he was. Because the reason he got sent to St. Helena was because the Brits were scared. Napoleon, after he lost Waterloo, hoped that he could come to England, a country he quite admired. They were enemies in war, but he admired them. And so they put him on a boat, the Bellerophon, and they brought him to Plymouth. And when the boat arrived in Plymouth, the whole town went out on small boats around the ship, waiting for a glimpse of the great French general. And when he came out on deck, women were swooning, and everyone was waving to him. And he was a real, not hero, celebrity. And then the sailors, when they went on shore, everyone was saying, have you seen Napoleon? Have you talked to him? What's he like? And so the Brits were afraid that if he even set foot in England, he might get enough followers to foment a revolution in England, because he was very much a post-revolutionary general. They were so scared of that they decided that he wasn't even going to set foot in England for a trial or anything like that. So they just said, no, take him to St. Helena, the most distant island in the world. It's like 1,000 miles from the African coast. It's 1,000 miles from anywhere. And then they set up a ring of ships around it, threatening to destroy any ship that came anywhere near. They sent him off to the most far-flung place on the planet because they were scared of the strength of his image. So they really did everything to destroy his image. And they carried on even after he was dead. So which is a kind of testament to his image. And the other, when I brought that book out in 2015, 200 years after Waterloo, I went to an auction where one of his hats was for sale. And it raised,
there was one the other day. There was one the other day that went.
There is one for sale now, one that they've proved that he actually wore, and the hat raised 1.8 million euros at auction, and it was bought by a South Korean businessman, a chicken seller, sort of Kentucky Fried Chicken, Korean style, and he said he was going to put it in the he said he was going to put it in the lobby of his head office to show that he, like Napoleon, was a winner. So this Korean fella still thought of Napoleon as a winner. So in a way, the French did win Waterloo, or at least Napoleon lost the battle but won the propaganda war, because 200 years later, he's still in lots of minds.
On the back of that, Napoleon said.
I say that in all the book. I try and share in the book.
Go on. On the back of that.
No, go ahead.
Napoleon said, good politics is making people believe that they are free. I mean, how is that relevant today?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, it's, well, it's a bit of a leading question. Obviously, Donald Trump was telling everyone, be free, make up your own minds, don't believe the experts, and the internet convinces us all that we're free, that we know as much about life as any experts, because our friends on Facebook say the same thing. So again, Napoleon was way ahead of his time. But then this was the dictatorial side to Napoleon, because he did conquer places. He made his own son king of Rome and one of his brothers king of a large chunk of Germany. He was a colonist. He was going in there to conquer. But he told people that he was bringing the French Revolution to them, and that they were going to have equality, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which they didn't always get, because there was a French army there, and you could not oppose Napoleon. But he told them this was what he was bringing to them, and some of them believed it, for a short while. Anyway.
Quickly, how do you feel about Macron?
Macron? I mean, in a way, I feel for the bloke, because he's completely new. He's neither left nor right, so he is getting attacked in all directions. And it's tough for him, because no French president in living memory has had to deal with any kind of pandemic. So, yeah, the government messed it up at the beginning, but then which government didn't? And since then, actually, France has been incredibly generous to the people during pandemic. There's been a rule whereby if your business was losing money during the pandemic, you got tax relief, and you could actually get you actually paid the difference between your 2019 turnover and your 2020 turnover. The government was paying for that. The government was subsidizing unemployment to try and avoid redundancies, to try and avoid businesses closing down into the economy in order to protect jobs.
Yep.
And I don't think the French realize how lucky they are. Free testing, free masks, everything's free, free vaccines, everything is free, and now it's all available. And the government seems to me to have done everything it can now to help people through and to survive financially, which not every government in the world has done. Lots of businesses throughout the world have closed down. And France has done its best to, about that. Can we talk a bit about this?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that next. I haven't actually read it,
okay.
But I wanted to know how similar it was to your James Bond Merde book.
My James Bond Merde book. The Dial M for Merde, you mean?
Dial M for Merde,
sort of spoof. Yeah. Well, the Dial M for Merde was kind of a spoof thriller. It wasn't really a James Bond, but it was kind of Paul West gets involved in a kind of
and it was brilliant. It was fantastic. It's great book, Dial M for Merde. Yeah, lovely, brilliant book.
Kind of spoof, sort of modern Agatha Christie, really, set in the south of France, with Paul West kind of getting involved in a plot to assassinate the president, but we're not sure if it's a real plot and everything. That was a real comedy. This is much more, it's historical fiction, and it imagines this fella who is very like Ian Fleming, but who is not Ian Fleming. His name is Ian Lemming, for legal reasons. And it involves him getting dumped on a Normandy beach in April 1944, just before D-Day, with this woman whose name is Margot Lind, who is kind of the opposite of a Bond girl, and she's
I just figured it was a Paul West thing.
No, it's not at all. No, it's a historical novel. It's a third-person historical novel. I've done a lot of research about the French occupation, the Nazi occupation of France, which is always a subject that's interested me because of the moral complications about being occupied. And so, what happens is the real Ian Fleming was an armchair soldier during most of the war.
Yeah.
Kind of claimed afterwards that Bond had been inspired by him, whereas there were at the time, and he knew it, lots of real female agents going into France, often as radio operators, linking up with the resistance, often getting killed. 50% of them never came back. They were captured, tortured, killed, or sent to concentration camps where they died. And so you had the reality of spying, which was the opposite of James Bond. No one wore tuxedos. This woman here has to buy secondhand French underwear because she can't have an English clothes label when she's in France, because if she gets captured, she'll be instantly tortured and killed. She had to convince people she was French. So, real spying was dirty. There was no good food. Your cigarettes quickly ran out. There's no champagne. You're lucky if you get you can find a bottle of cider in some barn. And so when Ian Lemming gets dumped accidentally on this beach with this female spy, she teaches him the reality of real World War II spying. And it's so traumatic that during the novel, you can see him kind of coming to imagine this male spy who's not going to take any shit from some female, and who's going to be in luxury, tuxedos, casinos, champagne. And you kind of, the idea is you kind of see him inventing James Bond as the opposite to what the real spies making him do. And so it's a kind of joke. It's a spoof James Bond, so it's kind of in the same language as James Bond, but it's a comedy. P.G. Woodhouse pops up in it because actually P.G. Woodhouse was interned in Paris in 1994. He's living in the Hotel Bristol here in Paris. So he pops up, and so it's a kind of spoof spy novel where she has a real mission to undertake because a resistance network being taken down by traitors, as so often happened, and she has to go in there and try and sort it out. And she's got this sort of sidekick who doesn't want to be there, who we kind of see him inventing James Bond, although James Bond is never mentioned because, again, for legal reasons, we see him being invented before our eyes, sort of thing. So it's a kind of affectionate James Bond spoof without mentioning James Bond, and a homage to the real people who are doing the real spying in occupied France, which was a horrendously dangerous job. You didn't, in the James Bond films, James Bond swans around saying, "Hello, my name is Bond, James Bond." He gets captured, tied to a laser machine, but then he escapes. That was the opposite of what happened in World War II spying. If the Gestapo had one inkling of your real name and your real identity, they would take you, they would torture you until you told everything you knew, because they knew how to do that. Then they would either shoot you or send you to a concentration camp where you would be worked to death, tortured to death, or just shot out of hand. It was the opposite of James Bond. And so somehow I've tried to make it a comedy, like a spoof, but at the same time with a serious background.
Are you looking forward to the new James Bond film?
I am, because it's been a long time coming, and also this was supposed to come out like almost 2 years ago when the film was due to go out, or over a year ago anyway. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. I mean, I quite like Daniel Craig, and the thing that amuses me is that none of these actors are anything like the Bonds that Ian Fleming imagined, because the original James Bond was half Scottish, half Swiss naval officer, who's really, really tough, just come out of the Second World War, thinks this whole Cold War is pretty unpleasant. He gets hurt a lot, really hurt. He seems to have some kind of trauma. That's why he drinks so much and smokes so much. The real James Bond was a kind of gritty post-war figure whom you don't see in the films. I mean, I love watching Roger Moore, Live and Let Die, a great film, but it's not James Bond. So I quite like the idea now that it's getting grittier. And apparently, in the new James Bond film, there's actually a female agent as well, which is quite funny for me.
Where can we find that beautiful book in your hand?
This book, mainly on internet. You can get it. You can order it from your bookshop, but it's a small publisher, PAF Books. So it's difficult to get from bookshops. Also, because the Bookseller magazine apparently didn't like talking about very small publishers, so they didn't give much publish to booksellers. But you can get it on the internet. You can get it on, Amazon, and it's easy to get if you want to get it. And or you can get it from. Oh, you can write to. You can get a signed copy if you want. If you write to me, via my website, I can send you. I can send out. I can give a signed copy, which will be sent out from either Paris or London. It'll take a few days or so.
I haven't read that book, but I'm going to buy it online right now. After I do this,
find me via my website, and you can get a signed copy for the same price from the publishers direct.
I like to. I want to do this a little bit more, and it's probably the first time I'm going to do this. But I like to kind of like close everything out with a nice, fun quiz, because the topics we've been doing are they're being a bit dark. So I want to kind of like, would you indulge me in a little fun quiz as we end?
Well, then.
Okay, so the quiz that I want to do with you is Napoleon quote or Jose Mourinho? You know who that is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to say who said this? Jose Mourinho, very famous football manager. You're a football fan. That wasn't quite sure, and you recently confirmed this. Or Jose Mourinho or Napoleon quote. You want to have a go at this?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Number one, I am blank and I don't change. I arrive with all my qualities and defects. Is that Napoleon or Jose Mourinho?
I think it's probably Jose Mourinho, I think, because I'm not sure Napoleon would have admitted to having defects, but I may be wrong.
You are correct, sir. Well done. Bing, bing, bing. England is a nation of shopkeepers. Is that Jose Mourinho or Napoleon Bonaparte?
Well, that is quite a famous Napoleon quote. I'm not sure, Jose Mourinho ever even went to shops while he was working in England. He probably had someone to do that for him.
Ding, ding, ding. Number 2 to Mr. Clarke. Number 3. Impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools. Is that Napoleon Bonaparte or is that Jose Mourinho?
Well, when you started out, I thought it was I was sure it was a Napoleon quote. Because someone, I think it might have been him, who said, "Impossible is not French."
Do you want me to repeat it?
Word. No. I'm guessing. I'm going to say it may be Jose Mourinho, sort of misquoting Napoleon.
Impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools.
Yeah, I think it's Jose Mourinho misquoting Napoleon, who said something like "impossible is not French," but I might be wrong there.
It's the wrong answer. Impossible. It's Napoleon apparently.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to default to you, the expert. Number 4. Unhappy is a nice word.
Unhappy is a nice word.
Unhappy is a nice word.
I've never heard that. So I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe it is Jose Mourinho describing a typical dressing room in one of his teams. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I've never heard that before.
You're absolutely right.
Oh, yes.
Well done. So here we go. You must not fight too often with one enemy, or you will teach all your art of war. Is that Jose Mourinho or Napoleon?
I mean, it sounds very Napoleonic, doesn't it? But then maybe, Jose Mourinho came to think he was Napoleonic. But I would say Napoleon.
You are correct, sir. Well done.
Thank you.
Next one. I love power, but it is as an artist that I love it. I love it as a musician loves his violin to draw out its sounds and chords and harmonies. Is that Mourinho or Napoleon?
It sounds a bit too sort of arty-farty to be Napoleon. So I would say Jose Mourinho, trying to think of himself as an artist.
It's Napoleon. Napoleon said that.
Oh.
Damn. The next one. The moral of the story is not to listen to those who tell you not to play the violin, but stick to the tambourine. Is that Napoleon or Marino?
Well, it sounds a bit like one of those Eric Cantona quotes about, being chased by seagulls or something like that. I'm going to say that sounds so confusing that it must be Jose Mourinho, because Napoleon was a clearer than that. And
Who is it? Marino. It is Marino. You're right. Sometimes you see beautiful people with no brains. Sometimes you have ugly people who are intelligent. Is that Marino or Napoleon?
I think it's probably Napoleon. I mean, there are millions of Napoleon quotes. He said like everything under the sun. So most of these I haven't heard of. So I would say it's probably Napoleon, because I don't think Jose Mourinho, as a football manager, really cares whether one of his players is good looking or not. He just wants him to like stick to the plan.
So you're saying Napoleon?
So Napoleon.
It's Marino.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Really? Wow. Why was he talking about that?
Don't know. Next one. Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. Is that Mourinho or is that Napoleon?
Well, that is quite a famous Napoleon quote. So
Yes, Napoleon.
I'm beating on that one.
And the last one. This is brilliant. Omelets, eggs, no omelets, and it depends on the quality of eggs. They class only 1, 2, 3, and some are more expensive and give you better omelets. When the class one eggs are not available, you have a problem. Is that Marino or Napoleon?
It sounds like Mourinho, after a bad transfer session in one summer, complaining that the board of directors won't buy him the players that he demands. So I'm going to say Mourinho, because again, it's Napoleon was usually a much clearer thinker than that. So I'm going to say.
You got 7 out of 10, my friend. That is a quote from Marino. So there you go.
Yeah. Oh dear.
So you know Napoleon better than Jose Mourinho. I think that should give you a bit of a pat on the back. There you go. Okay, so yeah, let's leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for coming on my show and giving up your time and everything. Let's leave it off by you putting yourself over and telling you where you can where people can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on my website, which is stephenclarkwriter.com, on Twitter, which is @SClarkWriter, I think, and on Facebook, Stephen Clarke. I don't know if it's Stephen Clarke Writer. I think it's Stephen Clarke Writer. Anyway, you can find me quite easily. But I'm saying, if you want to get a copy of this, either go on Amazon, or if you can get a signed copy for the same price. I mean, that one you can get in all sorts of bookshops. But if you want a copy of the new one, Amazon, or write to me, and you can get a signed copy direct from the publishers. I mean, it takes a bit of time because I have to sign it, and then it has to go and get sent off. But anyway, it'll be fairly quick. Anyway, well, thanks very much.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, cheers. Well, I've got to go now. So how do I turn this thing on? Here we go.
This is like we'll turn this off like old people. Thank you. Bye.